Hey there. This is our group's final project for Webware, the Fantasy Music Tour Builder. The idea of this application is that it provides a high-level format to music tour promoters, label executives, and tour managers for musicians um, to build a music tour and a fantasy music tour. As the idea is that you can put together different aspects of a tour that haven't been solidified yet in the real world, but could eventually be solidified. So that's why it's a fantasy tour. We have users here. We can log in and we can create a new account. There is form validation for both of these forms. If I enter nothing into the login, I get an error message here that there's missing information. Same with creating a new account. And there are other error messages for having white space in your username and password, for submitting a user that doesn't exist in the database when you log in, for creating a new account with a username that already exists in the database, entering an incorrect password when you log in. There's feedback messages for all of those use cases. If I want to log in though properly, I can use username Joe as password. And we get to the main functionality, build a fantasy music tour. This is a summary of the information I just gave about the purpose of the application. There are important details for entering information into the editor. And we have a text editor here for building the fantasy music tour. Where I'm clicking right now, these are editable paragraph HTML elements. We have a tour name, a tour duration, a tour continent, target audience age range, headlining artist, and direct support artists that make up fantasy music tour. If I want to use the text editor, right now my tour name's Judgment Day. I can change this to Judgment Row. I can submit. Scroll to the bottom, I get a confirmation message. The tour name has been successfully updated. If I go to my MongoDB database and refresh, I can see for user Joe, the tour name has been updated. And to see that that data can be queried from the database during another server session, I can log out. I can log back in as Joe. And we see Judgment Row, the updated tour name, successfully queried from the database and displayed here. For tour duration and target audience age range, there are specific user input validation checks that Daniel and Sultan worked on. I mainly worked on setting up the architecture via user authentication, via user login, user creation, and the main functionality I did, which was the fantasy music for text editor. But I'll hand it off to Daniel and Sultan to talk about the user input validation checks they did for tour duration and target audience age range.
So, as Matthew just mentioned, for tour duration, there's a validation check where it'll prevent you from putting in a negative number for the tour duration, such as negative 10 days. There's an error. You cannot enter any duration that's less than 0, has to be equal to 0 or greater than 0. And yeah, for the target audience age range,
Yeah, so for this, we have a bunch of validation. So a user can just submit a empty target audience range. It tells us to include an age range as divided with a dash. We also have an age range where the previous age has to be more than the other age. So for example, if we have 27, 25, and 7, this is invalid because you can't have the minimum age less than the maximum age. And also you can't just enter a single number. If you do that, then you have to include a valid age range, which is something like 25 to 30. which the MongoDB accepts. And yeah, that's that for the target audience age range. So for music trends information, I'll pass to Dish.
Yeah, for this part of the project, we worked on just having different kinds of musical trends information. We have new genres, revived genres, and technology and music. And then we also embedded a YouTube link with all of the Billboard's Hot 100 in that week. So that keeps the user updated with the new trends on and new musical information. And then
Yeah. And so Deesh, worked on our music trends information page. Another thing I'll add to that is that, this page adds value to, the application, contributes to the value of the application for the user as a whole. Because by consolidating relevant information about the music industry and technology in music right now, it gives a quick overview to, again, like label executives, tour promoters, and tour managers, that will allow them to pinpoint and identify hopefully artists, but that could be part of a real world music tour, and so they can plan that out in the fantasy music tour section. Sean couldn't be with us today for this video as he is at a conference in Atlanta, but his contributions to the project were largely the styling of our application using the Bulma CSS framework, which I also contributed to a bit and helped him out with, helped him learn about how to use that framework. If we go back to our login user creation page, he styled the two forms here for a user login and creating a new user. One thing we emphasized with the styling is making sure we have distinctive fonts for all of our text, making sure we have text sizes that are easy to read for the user, making sure we have buttons with distinct colors that stand out for the user as well. Sean also styled our footer at the bottom of each page here. So that way a user knows who the creators of this application are. So we'll log back in. The way Sean thought about styling our main functionality page here is by creating boxes for the summary information up here about the music tour text editor, and he styled a box for the important details for entering information. Below these two boxes, Sean applied the styling concept of having columns for displaying different editable paragraphs. Really what this is actually is in Bulma CSS, we have a columns class and then all of these editable paragraphs that are contained along with the tour name. So the label or paragraph and the button, these three guys are contained within a box, and each of these boxes are actually wrapped inside a single column, and that single column is inside a div that has a class attribute set to columns as well. In music trends information, Sean and I were thinking here of using sections for styling our application. So new genres, that's its own section. Information about revived genres, that's its own section. Same with technology and music. This information is in its own section. And with Bulma CSS, Sean and I were able to use the section class, assign the class attribute to the section class to make these sections have good margins and look nice and be well spaced out. In terms of the color scheme of the application, Sean made it a point to be minimal with it while also making sure that the user would still have a good experience reading the text and making sure that the background color being a light gray, actually a white tur, be easy to the eyes for the user. So we wanted to go relatively minimal with the colors, but while also making sure that HTML elements like buttons had distinctive colors so that a user knows immediately when they're about to submit information. Another thing to note about the colors is that when you here, if we enter an invalid input for target audience age range, we wanted to make error messages red. And when you want to submit valid user input for tour continent, for example, we want to make a successful update green. Those are all of our contributions for the fantasy music tour builder. In summary, again, I set up the architecture for our application, determined all the libraries that we were going to use, the different tech stacks, those being React, MongoDB, Node.js, Express, bcrypt.js actually for encryption of passwords, server side for the database, and a couple other libraries we're using. I created the functionality for the user authentication, so user login and user creation. I built the functionality for the music tour text editor. Daniel and Sultan programmed the user input validation checks for the tour duration and target audience age range fields in the text editor. Adish created our music trends information page here, and he came up with the content ideas for new genres, revived genres in technology and music. And Sean styled our application along with myself a little bit on that using Bulma CSS. Thanks.